Ahoy! How you doing? Tomorrow, California has to implement a $20 minimum wage on all restaurant jobs. I can't wait to see how many weeks it takes for California to completely implode. We'll all start closing doors, and food prices that are astronomically high will go like really, really, really high. And it's a complete failure. Free market's always the answer to everything. You can't actually dictate that kind of stuff. People say, well, they need a living wage. But if you were to go to get a pizza and it used to cost $25 and now it costs $50, you're like, no, thank you. No, thank you. And then the business just collapses. I can't wait to see that happen. This is what happens when people that have never ran a business or don't know anything about business start creating arbitrary, upside down and crazy rules to impose upon others. And like, oh, it doesn't work. You're like, yeah, it doesn't work. And you would have known that if you've ever ran a business. I find that kind of stuff really funny. Sorry, that was a little aside of mine. I spend a lot of mental energy thinking about energy and fields, and I find it extremely infuriating and abysmal, the stuff that I was taught. Of course, I knew from the get-go this stuff was completely impossible. You can't actually have nature work that way. And I'm always trying to simplify things. And when you actually replace a medium, you have to replace it with something else. And curved space-time doesn't answer it, and bumping particles doesn't answer it. It's completely irrational and absurd. Light does require a medium, as does every field. And I like to simplify things and talk about a couple things that I've never talked about before. And once again, nature is even more simple than even I realize, and I've simplified it far more than anybody that I know. I'm not 100% convinced that Natura Naturans, or Mother Nature, must be this simple. I'm 1,000% certain that it is. Occam's razor and simplicity is divinity. Everything is just simplex pressure mediation. Transverse field phenomena, measured in wavelength or frequency, of course, is just an incomplete torus. Stationary phenomena, or non-propagating phenomena, has reached a propagation barrier, and I've just called this super high energy light. I kind of call it hard light humorously. But, this is fundamentally hydrogen, and all atoms, of course, are compounded hydrogen, and of course that makes nature really simple. And that's, of course, the reconciliation of light and matter. I made that declaration years ago, and it was recently proven when constructive interference between two super high powerful lasers spontaneously produced matter. As well they should, so that point's been proven. Longitudinal. Now, Tesla called it his death ray, and I like to make a simple analogy of that here in a second. But it's simply a point source energy perturbation. There's a reason why lightning arresters don't really work. And I used to be a ham radio operator. No matter how much money you spent on lightning arresters to protect your gear, they don't really work. They partially work. That's because the scalar component of the dielectric discharge is way faster than the rate at which the actual blocking can occur. This is also, too, it's called an optical shock wave by some. The Cherenkov radiation in the reactor pools, it's that creepy, very light blue light. It's a point source light. You have to actually distinguish, and it's a distinction which is a huge difference, is that what everybody's talking about now vis-a-vis relativity and so-called quantum, or quantum mechanics, which of course is a completely nonsensical science style. Walter Russell actually said there's no greater travesty than is the assumed explanation of quantum regarding the universe. And of course Nikola Tesla himself said it was a travesty, and it was completely the ideations of a fuzzy-haired crackpot, his words regarding Einstein. Of course he's right. They have in mind propagation and reaction of space-time and fundamentally particles, but it can't work that way. I mean, do you really think that, you know, in the vacuum of space that there are photons traveling from, you know, the other end of countless other galaxies in the very, very, very distant universe? Do you really, really think that there's such a thing as a photon particle? Inverse square of the distance light falls off. It's like, well, that would certainly explain that. Well, it doesn't even begin to. If you actually have a medium and light itself, we say, well, light requires a medium, and I've heard this from other people, and debating for or against the Aether. Say, well, light doesn't require a medium. It's like, well, it does, but saying light requires a medium is like saying ice requires water. Well, ice is a temperature modality of water. Light doesn't require a medium. It is a perturbation modality of the medium. I'm the only person out there in the world, and you could go try to prove me wrong and you'll fail, will tell you what a field is, and it's just very simply an ether perturbation modality. Everything is either longitudinal or transverse or circular, but everything, of course, is a play upon a complete torus or an incomplete torus. I've got like 1,000 videos of the supercell. You can actually see the hypertrochoidal pattern between the magnetic and the dielectric. And this, of course, are not two different entities. They're different field modalities, of course, of the ether. And they have their own geometry. One is toroidal in the case of magnetism. One is hyperboloidal, or this hourglass shape in the case of dielectricity, where everything culminates and terminates at 0 point, or non-Cartesian pure potential, or what human beings can't wrap their brain around, which of course is rest. Out here time exists and down here time exists, and this is kind of taking the analogy too far, but this is the only way we can actually measure time, via this lobe of the hourglass and or that lobe of the hourglass. But right here, of course, sand is still passing through. Right here, you can't take that analogy too far, but right here there's no time. Time doesn't exist. It exists conventionally, and of course here is conventional and here is conventional. But what about here, where there is no time? Once again, you can't take this analogy too far in case of the hourglass, because there is sand passing through the middle. Time is only a measure. Every ancient culture, including the ancient Pythagoreans, said that time was the number 4. Anything that partakes of time partakes of phenomenality, and therefore, too, partakes of death. Anything that swims in the sea of time, of course, must partake of death. That's the reason why the number 4 means death and destruction in Chinese and Japanese and a few other ancient languages. It's also, too, the reason why 4 is the only number not present in the first 5 digits of the Fibonacci sequence. And in the Fibonacci sequence, relative to metaphysics of the golden ratio, everything is complete in 5. We have 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, and the only number missing there is 4. What about just a simplex analogy of a transverse phenomena? Well, light's propagated. It takes light so-and-so 232 million miles per second. Well, that's the rate of induction of hysteresis of the medium. Let me ask you a question. I got this rope tied to something over here. Yeah, here's this end of the rope, and there's that end of the rope. If I actually release some energy, and this, of course, in my case, the form of calories, you know, start plucking this string kind of like a long guitar string here and creating a frequency and a wavelength in the rope. The rate of induction at which it occurs, this rope isn't that long. It's about 8 feet long. It takes X amount of time for the propagation of the rate of induction from where the energy is generated, and by generated I mean released, from this point to that point over there. Now, to the conventional observer, which is a correct observation but an incorrect conclusion, you know, something is moving, but I mean, now, the rope is moving transversely at a set frequency, but I mean, there's nothing propagating from point A to point B. Well, the speed at the rate of which it occurs means that the frequency takes X amount of seconds, or in this case, partial seconds, from the propagation from one end to occur to the point at which it reaches the other end. But I mean, if this rope were super fine and invisible, we would kind of have a near perfect analogy, not really, of the ether. But I mean, nothing is moving. Well, sure it is. The frequency, the rate at which it occurs, well, that's also too correct. But this rope is at both ends even if no energy is released. We have to distinguish between what everything science currently has in a correct observation but an incorrect conclusion, and replace it with something else. We have to replace propagation, which implies the fallacy of waves, and once again I have to say, waves of what? These people think that light doesn't require a medium. Well, yes and no. I mean, light is the medium. It's a modality of the medium, just as every field is an ether perturbation modality. And of course that medium is itself the ether. If we use the analogy of the conjugate geometry of the entire universe, which is the magnetic and the dielectric, we have the ice as modality representative of magnetism, kind of crudely, and of course water is representative of the modality of the dielectric. There's not ice over here and water over here, we just have the same stuff. If I actually have a propagation barrier to release a nearly infinite amount of energy into this rope, I would actually create a shock wave where nothing would occur and everything would remain. The energy would be so high it would be bundled in a propagation barrier, and this of course we would have super high energy light in the case of matter. But nothing is propagating from one end of this rope to the other end of this rope, implying emission. Wave of what? People talk about waves. And they talk about energy. Waves of what? Energy? There's none of these people that have ever defined the term energy, and they also do not define the term field. So we have to replace propagation with perturbation. Right now I'm creating a perturbation at a set frequency in this rope. Nothing is traveling from here to here. Now, to a stupid person, which is 99.999% of everybody in science and academia, well, sure there is. I see the frequency is occurring, traveling at, as they see the frequency traveling through the rope, not down the rope. It's traveling at 292,000 miles an hour. Well, that's the rate of perturbation. That's the hysteresis that light is. Light is not an emission. It doesn't have a speed. It's not an emission. It's not a photon. It's not a wave. A wave of what? In this case, the wave we're talking about is this nylon rope here. Wave of what? Well, the wave of the disturbance of the rope. You're actually generating and releasing energy in the form of calories, expending calories and creating disturbance. That, of course, is a non-point source. What about explaining things really simple? Because this is what, and this is scalar. It's unfortunate it's called scalar waves. It shows you how upside down, stupid, and backwards academia and science is. They call it scalar waves, even though it doesn't have any wave component. Nikola Tesla called it his death ray. Some of us call it dew, or directed energy, but that's a bit imprecise because there are 5 things that are totally different that people will call dew. Make it really simple. Cherenkov radiation, once again, that bright blue glow at the bottom of the nuclear reactor. That's point source light. They call it an optical shock wave. Well, it is an optical shock wave, but it's point source light. Once again, this is the reason why lightning arresters don't work, because the primary component of lightning is faster than any reaction can actually occur. Longitudinal, of course, is a point source energy perturbation. Point source. Can't see anything. Of course, you could see this carbon fiber monopole really easy, but if I put it against something, and let's assume that this is so fine you actually can't see the monopole, which of course you can see it. I put it over here. You're not going to see anything from here to here as far as an energy release. But this is point source energies. Scalar, also too, Tesla's death ray. I don't have a hammer and I don't want to, but I got it positioned over there. I mean, I'm transferring, you can't see it, there's a table over here that's rocking back and forth. Now you can't see anything in this pole, but I'm transferring energy from point A to point B. Since there's no transverse component, there is no hysteresis or rate of induction which must occur of the ether. This is the reason why Tesla coils are actually measured, and there's probably like 100 videos on YouTube showing measured energy dissipation. Most of them are like 1.76 C. And I'm not going to say speed of light, because light's not a speed, it's a rate of induction. In other words, that's the hysteresis at which the energy occurs and travels. But of course it's not traveling. But if I take that rope and flick it, what's traveling? Well, the frequency is occurring and the disturbance is occurring at a certain rate, but there's nothing traveling from me plucking that rope from one end to the other end, is there? But this is, and I could write a book about this. Correct observations but incorrect conclusions. The same thing humanity's been doing since time immemorial regarding magnets. Not that this is a magnet. So, well, anyway, I got two magnets that are like polarity here. They're pushing apart as magnetic repulsion. In that case, that's actually accurate. You have a multiplicative force barrier when you try to push them. You can take all the energy in the universe, you can't really get them that close together. You flip them around, inverse polarity, they start to accelerate towards one another. But they're actually not accelerating towards one another. Fallacy number one of that scenario. They're actually accelerating towards a null pressure point between both. Literally a sink in the fabric of this demonstrable universe. Point number two, it's not magnetic attraction because there's no such thing as magnetic attraction. Magnetism, by denotation and definition, is centrifugal force in motion. There can be no such thing as magnetic attraction. Well, they're magnets and they're accelerating towards one another, therefore it is magnetic attraction. Correct observation, totally incorrect conclusion. Magnetic attraction does not exist. That's dielectric acceleration, and it is point source gravity. Gravity, of course, is non-point source mutual mass acceleration, but not towards either object in the case of a two-body scenario, but towards the lowest null pressure point between both. You know, by the way, we grew up with the science fiction nonsense here, talking about a disturbance in the force and Star Wars, and I'm not a Star Wars fan. Well, a disturbance, of course, is a perturbation. Ether is rest, which is the opposite of force. They could have been correct and say disturbance in the ether. The ether would have been rest. Instead of talking about the force, they should have talked about the rest, but that doesn't make any sense to human beings, because human beings are impressed by force, release of energy. Kind of like this fire here. Nobody's impressed by a lump of cold logs, but everybody's kind of impressed by burning fire, keeps you warm, heats your food. Human beings see the entire universe and every ancient culture is so... Whoa! Here's my monopole that fell down. I'll edit that out of this video. Everybody's impressed by force. They're not impressed by rest. We have to replace propagation implying waves, but once again, waves of what? And the idea of curved space-time, which is completely ridiculous. Time is only a measure. There's no such thing in nature as time. Time is a measure, the same as das Lichtwand, or what we call quantum. A measure is something that humanity agrees upon, like a mile, a gram, an hour, you know, a meter, a liter, a mile, so on and so forth. Those are measures, but a measure is not a thing, it's a measure of something else. Electricity is not the flow of electrons. That's what I actually call Cherenkov radiation. I keep calling Chernikov radiation, but it's actually Cherenkov radiation. Everything in nature, and this is the easiest way to look at it, everything in nature is either a shower head or a bathtub drain, you know? Both are just the flow of water. In the case of magnetism, that black portal that you actually see on the magnet underneath the ferrocell, and we've got like 1,000 videos on YouTube of the ferrocell or the supercell, looks like a drain. The field modality that it is also, too, a drain. Magnetism is the shower head. This is the conjugate geometry of the entire universe. The water and the ice, which are not two things, rather one. But we love to pigeonhole things. Well, this is the fascinating thing around a magnet. It's a magnetic field. You can feel the influence and the induction, the magnetic induction of the field's influence, and steel paper clips and whatnot will actually jump to the magnet. Fascinating. Wonderful. All of that's true. But there's no such thing as magnetic attraction. There is one person, and this is not hyperbole, there's one person on this earth that has told you over and over and over and over again that the predominant feature in each and every magnet, in any magnetic field in the universe, natural or otherwise, is not magnetism, it's rather dielectricity. Human beings are literally so unintelligent. They're like little kids watching a puppet show. You know, someone's got a little sock puppet up their, their hand up a sock puppet. Oh, and the kids are like, yay, look at that, yay. Every human being is fascinated by the sock puppet show of magnetism, and it is fascinating. You know, it does things, it'll smash your fingers, and, magnetism is fascinating. But the real story is not the little fabric sock puppet, is it? It's the guy or girl with his hand up the sock puppet that has researched the play or whatever the sock puppets are doing, like Punch and Judy show. Yeah, that's even too old for me. That's for these people with little sock puppets would, fight each other. That's 95% of the story. Not the dressed up little fabric sock puppet. All the little kids are looking, hey, look at that. The kids don't see. Probably know if they're young enough. They don't even know that there's someone back there with their hand up the puppet. That's 95% of the show, and the same is true of magnets. That's nearly a perfect analogy, by the way. The fascinating thing is not the sock puppet, i.e. the magnetism. It's the person and the hand, the controlling, when I say force, the controlling inertia, or the controlling rest, behind magnetism, because magnetism is the extrinsic dielectric field. That would be like saying the firecracker going off is magnetism, but the firecracker sitting there, not impressing anybody. Nobody's impressed by a firecracker. Maybe somebody is. Everybody's impressed by the firecracker going boom! That's the only thing that people care about. They don't care about the firecrackers. Yeah, watch it when I let them go. Yay, look at that! Same is true of magnetism. That's the predominant feature of any magnet. This is the reason why people email me like, I bought some really powerful magnets on eBay. I think I got gypped because I have to get a lot closer to feel the field. I was like, you did buy a more powerful magnet. Well, I don't get it. I got to get a lot closer. It means it's weaker. It's like, no. The power of a magnet is in the hand and the person, behind the scenes that's, pulling the strings, that kind of puppet or a sock puppet, regardless of whichever type. That's what dominates the power. That's why a more powerful magnet has a much bigger black spot underneath the supercell. Once again, it doesn't get any more simple than this. Everything in the universe is either a shower head or the drain. But the shower head and the drain are both about the flow of water. Nobody's impressed about the water going down the drain. Everybody's impressed about the shower head. Aren't they? Everybody's talking about the fancy new shower head with the 10 settings and the pulsing settings and the ooh. You buy that fancy shower head, it's got 10 pulse settings on it or whatnot. Nobody's impressed by the drain. As long as it drains, nobody cares. No one's like, ooh, man, my drain, man, it works great. Well, who cares about that? What about your shower head? It's kind of a crude analogy and kind of humorous, but it's true. Transverse, of course, is non-point source light, or in the case of fields. Light is an energy circuit. Any light that is not super high energy light and not propagating anymore because it's reached the threshold barrier and becomes matter is an incomplete torus. That incomplete torus is the energy transverse electromagnetic of EMF, electromagnetic radiation, i.e. electromagnetic frequency, EMF, of an incomplete torus, measured in frequency and wavelength. Explaining light, electricity, gravity, magnetism, black holes becomes super simple. Light doesn't really require a medium. Light is a modality of the medium. This is the fundamental ether mechanics of Tesla and anybody that fundamentally understood field theory. This is the explanation. This guy's got 2 PhDs. He's dead now. Yeah, I've edited his book so much, and he doesn't know the answer, which is good. He doesn't pretend to know the answer. He said, what do we can see here? Maxwell's equations, or the solutions indicate an existence of a causal link between electrical and magnetic fields. That's like looking for a causal link between ice and water. You don't have to link ice and water. It's like, well, one's just a modality of the other. There's not a causal link between ice and water, except ice is cold water, right? This is the reason why Maxwell's field equation right here doesn't present a causal link. It's not cause. This is, by the way, the metaphysics behind monistic metaphysics via the Pythagoreans, the Platonists, and Neoplatonists. It's called monism, which there is no original sin or original cause. There's no causal link for origin. Must be a conclusion electromagnetic field is a dual entity. It's not dual, it's principle and attribute. Duality is a misnomer in nature. Nature has no idea what a duality is. A duality implies an inherent contradiction. There are no, let me state this twice because it's so important, there are no dualities in nature, there are no dualities in nature. Any ideation of a duality in nature is said by ignorant human beings regarding principle and attribute. Light and illumination is not a duality, principle, attribute. Dielectric and magnetic is not a duality, principle and attribute. A hyperboloid and the torus, the two geometries of the conjugate principle of the entire universe, are not dualities. Together they are a holos, which is a unity, a one. Nothing exists from higher to lower to the absolute high to the absolute low that doesn't have at least one attribute. And that's not a duality. Extrinsic attribute is not a duality. Illumination is not a duality relative to light. Light and illumination, it's a duality. No, 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 no. There are no dualities in nature. Nature, I shouldn't say nature abhors a vacuum, which is also true. Nature denies a duality, despises, denies, rejects, scoffs at a duality. Fundamental field mechanics are extremely simple. I spent an enormous amount of mental energy thinking about it, and you know, the bliss of actually truly seeing the big picture of it all is absolutely wondrous. Communicating it is rather difficult, but I try. I hope you like these videos. If you ever want to contact me, my information is in the description below. Any donation also too in the description below is always warmly welcome. Lux Veritas. If you'd like me to go deeper on these topics, let me know. Thank you.